Picture the most dangerous square mile in the Western Hemisphere. Now fill it with the smell of low tide, rotting kelp, spilled whiskey that's mostly turpentine, and men who have not bathed since they left whatever desperate place they came from. Add fog so thick you could chew it. Shanty music leaking out of 30 establishments simultaneously, and a harbour full of abandoned ships whose crews have already been robbed, drugged, or conscripted into involuntary voyages to the South Pacific. That's San Francisco's Barbary Coast, 1873, a place so violent that the city's own newspapers called it the worst hellhole on the face of the earth, without exaggeration. A place where you could eat fresh Dungeness crab at a wharf stall, then get drugged through a trapdoor in the floor of a saloon, wake up 2 weeks later on a ship halfway to Shanghai, and nobody, not the police, not the mayor, not your own mother, would come looking for you. We're going back there tonight, not as tourists reading sensation stories in Midwestern newspapers about the wickedness of California. We're living it. 1 month, one person. Everything they would have seen, smelled, survived, and possibly not survived. So I make these history sleep stories and I get letters from people saying they listen while falling asleep, which is exactly the point. And also letters from people saying they've been awake for 3 hours now, thinking about Victorian sewage, and they blame me personally. Either way, get comfortable, turn the lights down. Here we go. You arrive on a Tuesday in March and the city tries to kill you almost immediately. Not violently, not at first. Just the usual way San Francisco kills newcomers in 1873, by being nothing like what you were told it would be. You step off the ferry from Sacramento, which arrived by train from Missouri, which cost you the last $43 you had in the world. And the first thing you notice is the fog. You've seen fog before. Morning mist over a river, haze burning off fields, that kind of fog. This is different. San Francisco fog is a living thing. It rolls in off the bay and swallows the city from the top down, eating the hills first, then the church steeples, then the second stories of buildings. By the time you're standing on the ferry landing at the foot of Market Street with your canvas bag and your letter of introduction and your absolutely useless optimism, the fog has swallowed everything above 20 feet, and the city looks like it simply stops mid-sentence at the second floor. The smell hits you next. Low tide, kelp and brine and something dead somewhere nearby. Maybe a fish, maybe something bigger. Cold smoke from the steam packets anchored offshore. The salt-sharp bite of Pacific air mixing with the sulphurous exhalations of a city built, in significant part, on landfill. On the actual hulls of ships that were abandoned here during the gold rush, dragged to shore, filled with rubble, built over until the bay shrank back and the city grew forward on a foundation of buried wooden ships slowly rotting into the earth. Beneath all of that, people. Thousands of people. The particular human smell of a working waterfront city. Sweat and fish guts and horse dung and grease and salt and tobacco and the faint sweet rot of something fermenting. You breathe in San Francisco for the first time and your body can't decide whether to be excited or disgusted, so it does both simultaneously. The letter of introduction is from your cousin Patrick. He worked the Comstock Lode for 3 years before moving here to be a printer's apprentice. He told you in his letter that the city was full of opportunity, that a strong young man could make his way, that there was always work on the waterfront. What he didn't tell you, what he maybe didn't know or chose not to mention, is that he was fired from the printer's job 4 months ago and is currently living in a rooming house on Sacramento Street that charges 40 cents a night and has about 2 weeks of money left. You find this out 20 minutes after you arrive. His face when he sees you at the ferry landing has a quality you'll come to recognize over the following weeks. The specific expression of someone who has made a promise they can no longer keep, trying to figure out how to unmake it while you're standing right in front of them. "Tom," he says. "Pat." A pause. His eyes go to the letter in your hand, the letter he wrote, and the expression deepens. "Things are a bit complicated," he says. Understatement of the century. "So this is how you end up on the Barbary Coast. Not because you went looking for it. Not because you wanted adventure or vice or the particular education that Pacific Street provides. You end up there because Patrick, in his guilt, found you the only job he could find on 2 days' notice, which was the only job available to someone with no skills, no connections, and no money. The job is at a place called the Anchor and Chain. The Anchor and Chain is a saloon, technically, in the way that a shark is technically a fish. It sits on Pacific Street, halfway between Kearny and Montgomery, sandwiched between a dance hall called the Melodeon and a boarding house that everyone knows is not really a boarding house. 3 stories of timber frame construction, sagging slightly to the east, as if tired of standing upright, with a painted sign above the door showing an anchor wrapped in chain. The paint is peeling. The anchor looks more like a dead man than an anchor. This is, you will come to understand, appropriate. The owner is a man named Calvin Maguire, known universally as Big Cal. He is 6 feet 4 inches of former merchant seaman, with hands the size of small hams and a face that has had things broken and reset and broken again and eventually given up on returning to any particular shape. He is 43 years old. He has a gold tooth on the upper right side, a knife scar that runs from his left ear to his jaw, and the eyes of a man who learned very early that the world is a transaction, and the question is always who's paying. He looks you over for about 4 seconds. "You're Patrick Callahan's cousin." "Yes, sir." "Pat says you're a good worker." "I try to be, sir." Big Cal makes a sound in his throat. Not quite skepticism, not quite acceptance, something in between. "I've got 3 rules," he says. "Don't touch the till, don't touch the girls, don't touch the stock without permission. Break 1 rule, I dock your wages. Break 2, I dock you again. Break all 3, a pause. You'll find work somewhere else." You understand him. "You sleep in the back, $1.50 a week. I keep 50 cents for room and board. You start now." Now is 6 in the evening on a Tuesday in March 1873. You put your bag in the narrow closet behind the kitchen that passes for a room, hang your coat on the single hook provided, and begin your month on the Barbary Coast. The first thing you learn about working in a Barbary Coast saloon is that the hours are not hours in any normal sense. The Anchor and Chain opens at noon and closes, in theory, at 2 in the morning. In practice, it never fully closes. There is no moment when the last customer is shown the door and the chairs are put up and the floor is swept and everyone goes home. There is only a slow tide. The crowd builds through the afternoon, peaks somewhere between 8 and midnight, and then gradually thins until there are only the stubborn ones left. The men who have nowhere else to go, or nowhere they can go anymore. The ones who've been there so long they've stopped being customers and started being furniture. Your job on the first night is to carry things. Barrels of beer up from the cellar, crates of bottles from the storeroom, buckets of water from the pump in the yard, ice when there is ice, which there usually isn't, carried in canvas sacks from the ice house 2 blocks away, dripping the whole way back, soaking through your shirt before you've gone half a block. The man who shows you the job is called Dutch, though he's Irish. Approximately 30 years old, gap-toothed, with forearms like ship rope, and a way of talking out of the corner of his mouth as if the side of his face is the part he trusts. "Carry heavy things," Dutch says. "Don't spill. Don't complain. Don't make eye contact with customers unless they're about to start a fight. In which case, make eye contact and go get Big Cal. Don't go near the back room. Don't ask about the back room." What's in the back room? Dutch looks at you for a moment. What did I just say? Point taken. The saloon is a long, narrow room with a bar running the length of the left wall and tables crowded into the rest of the space. The bar is mahogany. Actually mahogany, which feels wrong somehow, too fine for this place, with a brass rail at the foot and a mirror behind. The kind of long gilt-framed mirror you see in photographs of New York establishments, except one corner has been broken and patched with a piece of tin, and the reflection it shows you is slightly warped, so everyone in the bar looks a little wrong, a little bent, a little not quite themselves. The ceiling is low. The floorboards are stained a colour that could be spilled beer, or could be blood, or could be decades of both layered on top of each other until they're indistinguishable. There are gas lamps along the walls, but they're turned low. Everything happens in amber half-dark. The faces of the men at the bar are shadow and jaw and the glint of eyes. The faces of the men at the tables are worse. Just shapes, really. Gesturing shapes, occasionally lunging forward into the light long enough to settle something, before retreating back into the dark. The noises. You've been in saloons before. Missouri had saloons. Decent establishments with piano players and beer that was actually beer, and men who were mostly there to drink and talk and go home. This is not that. The noise in the Anchor and Chain on a Tuesday evening is the noise of men who have come to the end of something. Men from everywhere. Irish accents and English accents and the flat vowels of the Midwest, and something Scandinavian and something that might be Portuguese, and at least 3 conversations happening in Cantonese at a table near the window. Sailors between ships and miners who spent their last dust and railroad workers laid off when the transcontinental job finished, and men who just arrived, and men who've been here so long they can't leave anymore. All of them drinking, all of them loud. A fight breaks out at the far end of the bar at 8:30. 2 men, something about a card game, fists and then a bottle, and then Dutch materialises out of nowhere like a very large, very effective piece of Irish furniture, and the 2 men are outside on Pacific Street 30 seconds later, and Dutch straightens his collar and goes back to where he was standing. Does that happen often, you ask? You'll stop counting, he says, after the first week. The smell of the place embeds itself in you on the first night and never fully leaves. Beer, obviously. Cheap beer, the kind that's mostly water and grain, and the fermentation is doing most of the heavy lifting on flavour. Spilled beer soaking into the floorboards and the bar and the legs of chairs and the hems of people's coats until everything in the room smells slightly, fundamentally, of yeast, tobacco. Men chewing it and smoking it, and in both cases depositing the results wherever was closest. The spittoons are theoretically for this purpose. The floor is in practice also for this purpose. The oil lamps. There's a particular smell to gas lamps turned low, a faint sulphur catch at the back of the throat. The men themselves. In 1873, bathing is not a daily practice, particularly not for men at the lower end of the economic scale. Men who live in boarding houses with 1 bathroom per floor. Men who've been on ships for months. Men who've been sleeping wherever they could find space. The accumulated humanity in the anchor and chain on a busy night has a physical weight to it. You could almost lean against it. And underneath all of it, something you can't quite identify at first. Something sweet and chemical and slightly wrong. You'll figure out what that is later. Much later. You work until 2 in the morning. Then you fall into the cot in the closet behind the kitchen and sleep the way animals sleep. Immediately, completely, without dreams or memory of falling asleep. One moment the ceiling is above you. The next moment the ceiling is above you in different light. Morning. Your eyes open to a ceiling that's about 4 feet from your face, which is closer than you'd like, and your first thought is that you are warm, which feels wrong, which is your second thought, until you smell what is making you warm, which is the breath of another human being approximately 6 inches from the back of your neck. You are not alone in the cot. Which is a phrase I should clarify before your imagination takes it somewhere it shouldn't. Dutch, who apparently lives in the same closet, has arrived at some point after you fell asleep. And because the cot is the width of 2 adults who do not particularly mind each other, and you are 2 adults who just met, the resulting geometry is uncomfortable in ways that have nothing to do with anything other than the physical laws governing narrow cots and large human bodies. Dutch is already awake. He's been awake for a while, lying on his side of the mattress staring at the ceiling. "You're in my spot," he says. "I was here first. Left side is mine. You didn't tell me that. Seemed obvious." You move to the right side, which is against the wall and smells more directly of the kitchen's accumulated grease. Dutch pulls his coat back over himself. He sleeps in his clothes, you note, which you will also begin doing within a week, and the 2 of you lie in the dark for a few minutes before the sounds of the street outside make it clear that Pacific Street has been awake for hours and does not care that you're tired. It is 5:45 in the morning. San Francisco in March. Cold. Always cold. The kind of damp cold that comes off the bay and settles into buildings and refuses to leave. Your breath makes no visible fog. Not quite cold enough for that. But your feet, which have slipped out from under the thin blanket at some point, are numb at the toes. Not tingling numb. Actually numb. The specific cold of wooden floors in unheated rooms at the tail end of winter. The cold that bypasses cold and becomes simply the absence of sensation. When does the day start, you ask? Started already, Dutch says. Cellar needs draining, kitchen fire needs starting. Big Cal wants the tables clean before noon. The tables from last night. The tables from last night. And the floor. And the bar. And the... He pauses. Just come with me. It's easier to show you. The cellar is everything. This is the first thing you understand about working in a saloon of this type. The cellar is where the real machinery of the place lives, and it must be serviced before anything else matters. You descend via a ladder, through a trapdoor in the kitchen floor, into a space about 12 feet by 20, low-ceilinged, with packed earth walls and a floor of old planking laid over the original fill. The lantern Dutch carries throws orange light across the barrels, 6 of them, full ones stacked on their sides in racks along one wall, and the crates of bottles, and the earthen jars of molasses and the sacks of grain, and the mysterious locked cabinet in the back corner that Dutch glances at and does not explain. The smell down here is different from upstairs. Cooler. Less beer. More earth. The faint sweet wood smell of the barrels. And underneath that something else. Something slightly chemical. Faintly medicinal. Like laudanum, but not quite. Like something distilled wrong. Or distilled right for the wrong purpose. "The left barrel's been leaking since yesterday," Dutch says, pointing his lantern at a dark wet patch on the floor beneath the rack. "You'll mop that out before we roll a new one. Mops in the corner, buckets by the ladder." The bucket handle is cold iron in your palms. The mop is the kind that's been used so long the fibres have memorised the shape of every floorboard crack. You get down on your knees where the mop won't reach, wringing the cloth into the bucket with hands that are already cold and getting colder. The spilled beer smell rising directly into your face from about 8 inches away. Yeast and grain, and the particular flat sourness of cheap lager that spent the night seeping into old wood. After 20 minutes of this, you stop noticing the smell, which means it has entered you completely. It will be in your hair tonight, in the fabric of your shirt, in the small creases of your knuckles that you won't be able to scrub out with the communal soap. While you're doing this, Dutch is preparing the kitchen fire above you. You can hear him, the clang of iron, the crinkle of paper, the scratch of a match. Then the smell of wood smoke trickling down through the floorboards, and the faint warmth that follows. Not enough to thaw your fingers, but enough to know the cold is not permanent. By the time you've finished the cellar and climbed back through the trapdoor, it's 7 in the morning. Dutch has coffee on, real coffee, dark and slightly scorched, in a tin pot on the stove. He pours you a tin cup without asking. You drink it standing at the kitchen counter, hands wrapped around the tin and letting the heat conduct up through your palms. It tastes like burning and necessity. "What's the locked cabinet?" you ask. Dutch looks at you over his cup. The same look as last night when you asked about the back room. Slightly longer this time. "You've been here one day," he says. "Almost 2. You've been here one day. There are things in this place that take longer than one day to earn the right to know about. You drink your coffee." "I understand," you say, but you file it away. The cabinet, the back room, the sweet chemical smell that doesn't belong to anything you know. In San Francisco in 1873, filing things away is how you stay alive. The floor of the Anchor and Chain, after a full night of business, is a record. A geological record of everything that has happened in the space, compressed and layered and petrified until the original wood is barely visible beneath the accumulation of years. The sawdust is supposed to help. It's standard practice in saloons of this era. Spread on the floor each morning, it absorbs spills and gets swept out at night, taking the evidence of the day with it. The theory is sound. The practice, in a place like Anchor and Chain, is optimistic. The sawdust absorbs beer, yes, and tobacco spit, and occasionally blood. It also absorbs everything else. The tracked-in mud of Pacific Street in spring, which is mostly clay and horse dung and whatever the tides have deposited, the fragments of food that people drop, the gravel and sand that falls from men's boots, the leavings of mice who have established a thriving colony in the base of the far wall, and, in at least one corner, what appears to be decades of compacted sawdust that has become functionally a separate floor. Your job, every morning, is to sweep this out and put down fresh. The broom has been used so long the bristles have memorized the shape of the floor. You sweep from the back wall forward, pushing the accumulated sawdust toward the front door in slow waves. It comes up in grey-brown clouds that make you cough. The dust catches in your throat and sits there, settling into a faintly gritty sediment that you'll taste until you can drink enough water to wash it down. Beneath the sawdust, the floorboards are dark, almost to black near the bar. You can't tell if they were ever a lighter colour. They feel almost soft under your boots in spots, not rotting, not quite, but dense with absorption, with years of liquid pressing down into the grain until the wood has changed its nature. You sweep, you cough, you sweep. Outside, the morning's business has already begun. A cart passing on Pacific Street, the wooden wheels clattering on the uneven cobbles, the driver cursing at his horse in something that might be Spanish. Someone shouting a name, repeated twice, receiving no answer. The dull thud of something being unloaded at the docks 2 blocks west. The fog-muffled cry of a gull. San Francisco sounds different in the morning, lower, more mechanical, the city clearing its throat. By 8:30 the floor is clean enough for another day. You dump the accumulated sawdust in the bin in the alley, scatter fresh from the sack Dutch showed you behind the kitchen door, and straighten up, pressing your hands against the small of your back where the bending has started to make itself known. A specific ache, not sharp but persistent, the kind that you know will be worse tomorrow and the day after until your body either strengthens or accepts it. Dutch is watching you from the kitchen doorway. Not bad, he says, which, from Dutch, translates to something approaching praise. By 11:30 they start appearing, not the regulars yet. The morning customers of Pacific Street establishments in 1873 are a particular type. Men who ended last night's drinking too late or too early, and who are back not so much because they want more as because this is the only place that feels like anywhere to them. The first man through the door when Big Cal unlocks at noon is a short, weathered individual in a canvas coat who goes by the name Jenkins. He sits at the end of the bar closest to the door, puts a coin on the mahogany without looking up and says, "Rye." He gets rye. He drinks it like he's taking medicine. Precise. Necessary. Without pleasure. Jenkins was, Dutch tells you later, a whaling man. 20 years on ships out of New Bedford. When the whale oil business collapsed, kerosene was cheaper. Kerosene was winning. The whales themselves were getting scarcer after decades of systematic slaughter. Jenkins found himself in San Francisco with skills that were suddenly abruptly worthless. He knows how to harpoon a whale, how to read the Pacific swells for weather, how to navigate by stars, how to render blubber into oil in barrels that will survive a 6-month voyage. In 1873 in San Francisco, none of these things pay. He comes every day, you ask Dutch, every day for 2 years. Big Cal lets him run a tab. Dutch gives you the look. Then, unexpectedly, he explains. Jenkins doesn't run a tab. Jenkins always pays, always has exact change somehow. I've never seen him short. I've never seen him have extra either. It's like he calculates exactly what he can afford to drink and drinks exactly that much and not one drop more. That's sad, Dutch says flatly. Yes. The second thing you learn about working in a Barbary Coast saloon is that the customers are the geography, not the building, not the street. The people who come through the door create the landscape of your days and your nights, and you map it the way a sailor maps a coastline, by the dangerous parts, the shallow rocks, the places where the current runs wrong. By your third day, you've learned to read the room the way Dutch does, not by looking directly at people, but by tracking peripheral motion, the way a man's shoulders move when he's had enough and doesn't know it yet, the way 2 men's bodies orient toward each other when something is building between them, the way a man's hand goes to his pocket, back pocket, waistband, boot, when he's thinking about what's in it. Big Cal taught Dutch this. Dutch is teaching you. Watch the hands, Dutch says during one of the quieter afternoons, leaning against the kitchen door with his arms crossed. The face lies. The hands tell you everything. There's a man at the corner table who's been nursing the same beer for an hour. His face is calm. His hands are flat on the table, pressing slightly, like he's trying to hold the table down or hold himself down or both. Him, you say. Dutch nods. Going on 2 hours. He's working himself up to something. Could be he picks a fight. Could be he just drinks himself into something quieter. Which one? Wait. You wait. The man drinks the last of his beer. His hands come up off the table. He signals for another. The hands relax. Quieter, Dutch says. Tonight, anyway. You see the back room for the first time on your 5th day, and it changes everything you thought you were doing here. It's not. Let me be careful about this. The Barbary Coast has a reputation that, in some accounts, makes it sound like every establishment was running every variety of criminal enterprise simultaneously. The reality was both more mundane and more specific. The back rooms of Pacific Street establishments were not all opium dens or brothels or torture chambers, despite what the reform newspapers of the era would have you believe. Some of them were just rooms where business was conducted. This specific business was shipping, specifically crewing ships. You're on your way to the cellar with a bucket when the back door, the one Dutch told you to avoid, opens from the inside and a man you haven't seen before comes through. He's compact, well dressed by Barbary Coast standards, with a clean coat and a beaver hat and eyes that move quickly around the room before settling on you with an assessment that takes about 2 seconds and leaves you feeling slightly sorted through, like a box of goods being evaluated for quality. You're new, he says. Yes, sir. Tom, Big Cal says from behind the bar. He hasn't looked up from the glass he's polishing, which is somehow more menacing than if he had. That's Preacher. He uses the back room Tuesdays and Thursdays. Preacher, you say. The man smiles. It doesn't warm his face at all. Nobody called me that for the first 20 years, he says. Now everybody does. Go figure. He looks at your bucket. Cellar work? Yes, sir. Good man. He goes to the bar and says something to Big Cal in a low voice. You go through the kitchen and down through the trapdoor, and you don't hear what is said. But that evening you see what the back room is for. You're moving through the saloon with a crate of bottles when the back door opens again, and Preacher comes out leading 2 men. They're obviously sailors. Not by their clothes specifically. Their clothes are unremarkable, but by the way they move. The particular rolling ease with which men who've spent years on moving decks navigate the ground, as if they expect it to pitch under them at any moment and have made their peace with this. They're young, your age maybe. One has a Scandinavian look, blonde wide through the shoulders with the kind of complexion that has been weathered early. The other could be from anywhere. They both have the waterfront smell, that salt and rope working harbour smell, the smell of men whose work happens in wind. Preacher buys them a drink. He talks, they listen. He talks more. The Scandinavian one nods eventually, pulls out a paper, signs something. Preacher folds the paper away, smiles his non-warming smile, and signals for another round. Dutch appears at your elbow. Articles, he says very quietly. What? Ship's articles. That's what they signed. Crew contract. They just agreed to ship out. He watches the scene at the bar. Question is whether they know where to. What do you mean? Ships leaving San Francisco on regular runs. They'd know the route, the captain, the pay. Men sign on for those willingly. Preacher doesn't recruit for regular runs. The quiet settles between you for a moment. Where does he recruit for, you ask? Dutch doesn't answer. He picks up the crate you set down and carries it to the bar. but the answer's already assembling itself in pieces you've been collecting all week. The locked cabinet in the cellar, the sweet chemical smell, the back room, the way certain customers after a drink or two sit differently, slower, heavier, their words thickening, than the beer alone would account for. The way the men Preacher works with are always young, and always a little too willing, or not willing exactly, compliant. The difference between a man deciding and a man whose decision has been made for him by something in his glass. You know about Shanghai Kelly. Everybody knows about Shanghai Kelly, even in Missouri. There were newspaper stories, the kind that circulate widely, because they are the specific combination of terrible and extraordinary that newspapers require. In 1875, 2 years from now, though you don't know this yet, a crimp named Kelly will solve the problem of having to fill 3 ships' crews simultaneously by throwing a party on a boat, inviting 80 men, and spiking the drinks until everyone is unconscious. Then he'll sail the boat to the waiting ships and distribute the bodies. 80 men, all at once. But that's 1875. This is 1873. And Preacher is, in the taxonomy of crimps, a smaller operator, more careful. He doesn't Shanghai in quantity. He does it retail, 2 men at a time, maybe 3. Always in the back room of the Anchor and Chain on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And Big Cal, who has 3 rules about the till and the girls and the stock, Big Cal gets a share of the placement fee. You know this now, and you have to decide what to do with knowing it. Dutch's real name is Michael Patrick Sheehan. He's from Cork, originally, though he came to America at age 12 and spent his adolescence in 5 Points, New York, which is its own education. He tells you this on the 8th day, sitting on a barrel in the cellar after closing, sharing a tin cup of the cheap rye that Big Cal keeps for his employees. The rye tastes like furniture polish and ambition. How'd you end up here, you ask? Same way everyone ends up here. Looking for work, found a job, the job turned into the next job turned into this. That's not really an answer. No, he says. A pause. He pours more rye. I work the railroad, he says. Central Pacific. East End, last 2 years of the construction, grading and track laying. He looks at his hands. The knuckles are large, the skin cracked along the lines of each joint, permanently darkened in the creases in a way that soap hasn't touched in years. Then the railroad was done, and they didn't need as many men anymore, and I was in Sacramento with money for about 3 weeks and no particular plan. You didn't go home? Home is Cork. I was 12 when I left. I don't know anyone there anymore. New York. He shakes his head. I can't go back to New York. Why not? The look. I can't go back to New York, he says again, firmly, finally. And the work here is work, Dutch says. Don't think about it more than that. Do you know what's in the cabinet? Yes. And you're okay with that? Dutch is quiet for a moment. The rye moves in the cup when he rotates his wrist. I'm okay with being employed, he says. Whether that's the same thing as being okay with everything that employment involves, I haven't decided. He drinks. I figure I work here until I've saved enough to do something else. Then I do something else. How much have you saved? He looks at you. $30, he says. The flatness in his voice says everything. 2 years. $30. 5 cents an hour. The arithmetic of a person who is here because they have nowhere else to be. You don't say anything. The rye is bad and the cellar is cold, and somewhere above you Pacific Street continues its eternal transaction. Don't drink from the back room, Dutch says. I know. I know you know. I'm saying it anyway. Don't drink anything you didn't pour yourself from the bar. Don't accept drinks from Preacher or any of his people. He stops, starts again. There was a kid here before you, 18, from Ohio. He thought he understood what was happening. He thought he was smart about it. He had one drink in the back room because Preacher offered, and he thought he'd just hold it, just be polite, and he put it down for 1 minute and picked up what he thought was his glass. And Dutch finishes his rye. He shipped out 2 weeks later, woke up on a bark heading for Yokohama with a 6-month contract he had no memory of signing. The cellar is very quiet. Right, you say. Right, Dutch says. Okay, I said I'd explain. Let me explain. Crimping is the word. Crimps were people who, in the language of the era and the maritime trade, supplied crews to ships. Ships needed crews, getting from San Francisco to any port that mattered. Cape Horn, Hawaii, Yokohama, Sydney, Valparaiso, Hong Kong required trained men who could work a vessel through open ocean. Finding those men was, in theory, the captain's job. In practice, on the Barbary Coast, it was the crimps. The legitimate version of crimping was a kind of labour brokerage. A crimp would know which captains needed crew. He'd know which sailors were between ships. He'd make introductions, collect a placement fee. Everybody went home satisfied. This is the legitimate version. The less legitimate version, the version the Barbary Coast was famous for, the version sailors' unions would eventually crusade against, that became a federal crime in 1872 and remained rampant anyway, involved innovations. Innovation 1, the boarding house system. A crimp would run a boarding house near the waterfront where sailors could stay between ships. Room and board was provided on credit, against the sailor's future wages. By the time the sailor was ready to ship out, he'd accumulated a debt for room, for board, for clothing, for recreational expenses that would take his entire advance payment to settle. He'd ship out already broke, working to pay off money he'd spent before the voyage started. Innovation 2, knockout drops. Laudanum was common. Chloral hydrate was common. A drink spiked with the right compound would leave a man conscious enough to walk, compliant enough to sign, and confused enough not to remember the details clearly in the morning. Innovation 3, the actual Shanghai. A man rendered unconscious, drugged drink, a blow to the head, the trapdoor in the floor that certain establishments were reportedly experimenting with, and delivered to a waiting ship, where he would wake up to the smell of open ocean and the news that he had signed articles and was now a member of the crew, and the coast of California was already below the horizon. The locked cabinet in the cellar, you have now worked out, contains the compounds. The back room is where the transactions happen. Big Cal gets a percentage. The sweet chemical smell you couldn't identify on the first night. That's what's in some of the drinks that come out of the back room. This is what you're working in. Not just a saloon, a funnel. Men come in. They drink. Some of them, specifically selected men, drink particular drinks. They go out, sometimes on their own feet, sometimes not, and end up on ships. The ships sail. The bay's population dwindles, replaced by ships heading out under the Golden Gate toward wherever the cargo demands. And the anchor and chain takes its cut. You think about this for a long time that night in the cellar, mopping around the barrels, with the lantern throwing shadows on the earthen walls. You're making $1 a week net. You're doing this in a building that is also, as a secondary business to its primary business of selling alcohol, facilitating kidnapping. These two facts sit next to each other in your mind and you're not quite sure what to do with them. I want to tell you about the fog because it matters in ways that aren't immediately obvious. San Francisco fog in 1873 is not just weather, it's a feature, it's structural, it's the reason certain things can happen here that couldn't happen in other places. The fog comes in every afternoon in summer, rolling through the Golden Gate and over the hills and down into the city, dropping temperatures 15 degrees in an hour. It comes in spring too some days, in thick banks that reduce visibility to half a block and muffle sound in a way that makes the city feel smaller and more dangerous simultaneously. At night, the fog turns the gas lamps into small yellow blurs. The street signs become unreadable from more than 3 feet away. Pacific Street, already not a street you want to get lost on, becomes actively dangerous in dense fog because you can hear the noise but you can't see the source, which means someone can be very close to you before you know they're there. You learn this in the second week, walking back from an errand at 10 at night in thick fog, carrying a package you've been told is cloth samples, but which is solid in a way that cloth is not. You're passing an alley between two buildings when you hear footsteps behind you, matching yours. The thing about footsteps in fog is that the sound bounces. You can't tell how close. They could be 10 yards back. They could be 6 feet. You walk faster. The footsteps walk faster. You don't run. Running in fog on uneven Pacific Street cobbles will put you on your face. You walk faster toward the warm light of the Anchor and Chains windows, which you can see as a smear of amber in the grey, and you push through the door and the noise and warmth hit you, and you stand there for a moment with your back against the door frame. Dutch looks up from the bar. "You're white," he says. "Someone was following me." Big Cal looks up from the far end of the bar. "Pacific Street," he says, as if that's a complete explanation, which you're learning it is. There is a hill above the Barbary Coast. Telegraph Hill rises abruptly from the flat waterfront district to a peak of 295 feet. It was the hill where the early signal station stood, the one that relayed news of incoming ships by semaphore to downtown merchants, the one that gave the hill its name. By 1873, the signal station is long gone. There's a wooden tower at the summit, and various people's shacks and cottages clinging to the slopes, and the Italian families who came in the 1850s and decided this was as close to the Mediterranean as California got and simply stayed. You go there on your second Sunday off, climb the wooden steps nailed into the hillside. Steep, steep, the hill rising almost vertically on the northern face, your thighs burning by the second landing, your hands grabbing the rope guide rail because leaning forward seems necessary and correct, on a morning when the fog has, for once, stayed out at sea. The view from the top is, here is the thing about San Francisco in 1873, it's a young city, astonishingly young. The first permanent settlement was 1776, but the actual city, the buildings, the streets, the commerce, dates from 1848. 25 years ago, this was a small port village called Yerba Buena, with a few hundred residents. Now it has 150,000 people. Now it has the Palace Hotel under construction downtown, which will be the largest hotel in the world when it's finished. 7 stories of brick and glass taking up an entire city block. Now it has cable cars being planned up the hills. Now it has newspapers and banks and opera houses and a Chinatown that is its own world within the city, its own economy, its own governance, its own everything. And all of it is visible from Telegraph Hill on a clear March morning. The bay spreads out below you. The actual bay, from here you can see its whole curvature. The islands in the centre, Alcatraz, low and dark, already a military installation, though it won't become what you know it as for another 60 years. The Marin headlands closing off the northern end, green and brown and enormous. The mountains further inland still capped with snow that hasn't decided yet whether spring has permission to take it. The Golden Gate, the narrow strait between the bay and the ocean, is a gap in the hills to the west. Ships are coming through it right now. You can see the sails, white and red-orange in the morning light. Arriving from somewhere, going somewhere. The ships have been moving through that gap for centuries, and they will keep moving through it long after everything you can see from this hill has been torn down and rebuilt. Below you and to the east, the city proper, the grid of streets surprisingly regular for a city built in such haste. The hills, San Francisco's hills, which the streets run up and over regardless of topography, because the surveyors who laid out the grid did so on a flat map and apparently refused to acknowledge the hill's existence. Buildings from the 1850s next to buildings from last year. The architecture mixing eras without apology. The bay is the colour of hammered tin, cold-looking and beautiful. You can see the waterfront from here, the wharves, the ships at anchor. The buildings of the Barbary Coast, which from this height look almost like a normal neighbourhood. Just rooftops, smoke from chimneys, the narrow street canyons between them. From up here, you can't smell it. From up here, you can't hear it. From up here, it looks like something you might visit on purpose. You sit on a rock near the summit and eat the bread and cold sausage you brought in your coat pocket, and look at the city for a long time. You've been in San Francisco for 2 weeks. You've spent most of those 2 weeks inside the Anchor and Chain or running errands within 3 blocks of it. The city, from street level, is a series of immediate concerns. This person, this task, this smell, this danger. It doesn't have shape from the inside. It's just walls and noise and the next thing that needs carrying. From here, it's a system, a machine, a thing with logic to it, even if the logic is brutal. The ships come in from the ocean carrying goods. The goods move through the warehouses and the merchants. The merchants create the commerce that creates the wealth. The wealth concentrates, more than you'd expect in a city this young, in buildings that get taller each year. And down in the Barbary Coast, the men who make the commerce possible, these sailors, the dock workers, the labourers, eat and drink and sleep and occasionally get shipped out against their will on voyages they didn't choose. The machine runs on labour. The labour is you. The labour is Dutch, $30 saved in 2 years. The labour is Jenkins at the end of the bar with his exact change and his rye. The labour is whoever is in Preacher's back room right now signing papers they may or may not fully understand. You look at the bay, the ships coming in through the gate, more ships at anchor, the sailing ships that are already being replaced slowly by steam. You can see the smoke trails of 2 steamers on the bay, churning through the water faster than anything with sails. The world is changing. 1873 is a particular inflection point. The Transcontinental Railroad finished 4 years ago, connecting California to the rest of the country. The telegraph already connects it to the world. The economy that built the Barbary Coast, the gold rush economy, the whoever gets there first economy, is being replaced by something more organised, more systematized, more thoroughly owned by fewer and fewer people. The Barbary Coast is a remnant, an anachronism, almost, a piece of the raw city that hasn't been sorted yet, that's still running on gold rush rules. Whoever has the angle wins. The fog is starting to come in from the west. You can see it rolling over the hills, the white mass of it advancing across the peninsula from the ocean side. In an hour, the view will be gone. You eat your bread, pocket the wrapper, and stand. From here, you can see Pacific Street below you. The Anchor and Chain is visible. You can pick out the anchor sign, the green paint of its door. Somewhere in it, Dutch is starting his Sunday routine. Jenkins is drinking his rye. Big Cal is, wherever Big Cal goes on Sunday mornings, you'll go back. Of course you'll go back. $1 a week net and nowhere else to go. But for right now, for this hour on Telegraph Hill, you're high enough that the city can't reach you. That's not nothing. In a place like this, being temporarily out of reach is a luxury you learn to take seriously. You take one more look at the bay, the ships coming in through the gate. Always more ships coming in. The wharf is unlike anything you've seen. And before I describe it, I need you to understand something specific about San Francisco's waterfront in 1873, because it is unlike any waterfront that exists anywhere in the world at this exact moment. The bay is full of abandoned ships, not wrecked ships, not ships that sank or foundered, ships that were simply left. When the gold rush started in 1848 and 1849, ships arrived from everywhere, from New York and Boston and New Orleans, from Liverpool and Hamburg and Valparaiso. They arrived carrying men who wanted gold and supplies to sell to men who wanted gold, and when they arrived, the crews deserted. Every man on every ship, sailor, cook, officer, the whole works, walked off the gangplank and headed for the hills, because the hills had gold in them, and the ship had only the ship. The captains couldn't stop them. The law couldn't stop them. Nobody could stop the absolute democracy of gold fever. So the ships sat and sat. At peak, in 1850, there were something like 500 abandoned ships anchored in San Francisco Bay. Not all at once. Some were eventually crewed up and sailed out. Some were salvaged, some sank. But the bay held more abandoned vessels than any port in history before or since. Some were dragged ashore and converted into buildings, hotels, offices, warehouses. The ship Niantic was beached and used as a storehouse, then buried when the city expanded into the bay. And to this day, right now, in 1873, it is under a block of Montgomery Street, holding up a building from below, a wooden ghost ship under the financial district. You walk over it every time you make deliveries to the counting houses, but there are still ships in the bay, dozens of them, some still floating, some half sunk, their masts tilted at angles that suggest the water is winning. They sit there like a graveyard, like the city's past held in suspension, like a reminder of what San Francisco was when everything was possible, and nobody had decided yet what it would become. You stand at the wharf on a rare, clear morning and look at them, and you think about what those ships mean. Each one a crew that walked away, each one a captain left on deck watching his livelihood get up and leave, each one a piece of the world's commerce interrupted, halfway sometimes, by the specific madness of gold. The ships have been there for 20 years now. They're becoming part of the landscape. Children in San Francisco have grown up with them as background the way you grew up with the Missouri River. Just there. Just part of what the world looks like. But somewhere in the bay, there are men who remember watching those ships arrive, who are on the docks when the crews walked off, who watched the captains curse and bargain and finally give up. Somewhere in the bay, there are ships being crewed right now, by men who signed willingly, and some who didn't. 3 blocks from the Anchor and Chain, in a direction that feels like crossing a border, is Chinatown. San Francisco's Chinatown in 1873 is the largest Chinese community outside of Asia. It occupies roughly 6 blocks of Sacramento Street and the surrounding area, and this is the thing about it, a completely separate city within the city. Not a neighborhood, a separate operating system. You walk through it for the first time on an errand in the 3rd week, carrying a delivery to a laundry on Sacramento Street. Big Cal doesn't explain why a saloon has business with a laundry on Sacramento Street. You don't ask. The boundary is immediate and physical. On one side of the block, Pacific Street. The noise and the smell and the particular English-Irish-Scandinavian chaos of the Barbary Coast. On the other side of the block, another world entirely. The sounds change, the language changes, the smells change, and the smells are the thing you notice most immediately, because your nose has been marinated in the anchor and chain for 3 weeks, and the olfactory reset of walking into Chinatown is almost physical. Dried fish and star anise, and the sweet smoky smell of joss sticks burning in doorways, and underneath all of that, something you can't name but that your body registers as different, as an entire other set of culinary traditions applied to an entire other set of ingredients. The streets are narrower here. The signs are in 2 languages, English on the bottom, Chinese characters above, as if the English is an afterthought, a translation provided for the benefit of visitors. The buildings have 2nd-story balconies with carved wooden railings, and people stand on them and watch the street below with the comfortable ease of people in their own place. This is their own place. 40,000 Chinese in San Francisco by this point. Most of them came for the gold rush, like everyone else, and most of them stayed, like everyone else, and built something permanent, like not quite everyone else. They built the railroad too. The Central Pacific's workforce, the people who did the most dangerous work, who blasted through the Sierra Nevada and laid track across the Nevada desert, was roughly 80% Chinese. 12,000 men, maybe more, working for $26 a month, when white workers were paid $35 doing the same work, and doing it so efficiently that the railroad's progress doubled when the Chinese crews took over. The railroad was finished 4 years ago. The Chinese workers came back to San Francisco and the neighborhoods that were waiting for them. Dutch worked alongside Chinese crews on the railroad, he told you. Good workers, he said, which from Dutch is very high praise. Better than us in the heat. Could work in conditions that had put an Irish lad on his back. The white workers didn't like them. That's the mild way of saying it. The actual way of saying it is that there were riots, that there were laws being debated in Sacramento right now in March 1873, specifically designed to keep Chinese immigrants from competing with white workers. That men on Pacific Street talked about the Chinese the way men have always talked about people they're afraid of competing with contempt, with hostility, with a specific creative nastiness that tells you more about the speaker than the subject. You walk through Chinatown and nobody bothers you. A woman selling vegetables from a basket looks at you briefly and looks away. A boy runs past on some errand. The laundry is where you were told it would be, and the man who takes the package from you does so without comment and gives you an envelope in return. You walk back to Pacific Street. The boundary crosses again. The smells change. The noise resumes. You deliver the envelope to Big Cal. He puts it in the strongbox under the bar without opening it. You don't ask. It is 3 weeks into your month when it almost happens to you. It is a Thursday, Preacher's Day. You've gotten good enough at timing his visits that you can usually arrange to be in the cellar or the kitchen, or anywhere that isn't the back room during the relevant hours. But Thursday, week 3, the cellar is already done, and the kitchen is clean, and Big Cal wants the back counter stocked, which means you have to carry a crate from the storeroom through the main saloon just as Preacher is completing his business. The man at the bar with Preacher is a man you haven't seen before. 30 or so, dark beard, wearing clothes that suggest he arrived in San Francisco recently and bought the cheapest things available to replace whatever he came with. A man who has been travelling hard and is at the stage of travel where comfort has stopped feeling like a reasonable expectation. He has a glass in front of him. He's been working on it. Preacher sees you with the crate and does something unexpected. He smiles. Not the non-warming smile he uses professionally. Something else. Something that looks like the smile is being deployed on you specifically. "Tom," he says, "set that down a second. Have a drink." You feel something cold move through you that isn't the temperature. "I'm working," you say. "Take a minute. Big Cal won't mind." Big Cal is at the other end of the bar. He doesn't look up. The man with the dark beard is watching you with the glazed attention of someone who has had several drinks, and whose attention is narrowing. Preacher gestures at the glass the barman has placed in front of your usual spot. A whiskey. Neat. You look at it, then you look at Preacher. "I don't drink on shift," you say. A pause. "That right," Preacher says. "Big Cal's rule," you say. This is not actually a rule Big Cal has stated, but it feels like something he would say, and you are gambling on Preacher not knowing Cal's full list of rules, and on Preacher not wanting to make a scene in front of a client. Preacher looks at you for a moment. The assessment is doing the thing, sorting through you, weighing you, calculating. Then he glances at the dark-bearded man and back at you, and something in his calculation concludes. "Fair enough," he says. "Back to work." You pick up your crate. You carry it to the back counter. Your hands are not quite steady. Later you tell Dutch. He's quiet for a long time. "You did. Right," he says. "He knows now," you say. "He always knew. He just..." Dutch pauses. "You were a possibility. Now you're not a possibility. He'll move on." "What about the man with him? What about him?" The flatness in Dutch's voice, not a question, an answer. What about him? You know there are men who leave and don't come back because you've been watching for 3 weeks and you have a memory for faces. The Barbary Coast is a district with high population turnover, sailors in and out, labourers moving between jobs, men who are passing through. So absence is expected. Absence is normal. A man who was drinking at the Melodeon last week might just be working the docks the next, or shipped out legitimately, or moved north to the mining camps. But there are certain absences that have a different quality. A man you'd seen every day for a week, nursing his beer in the corner, who stopped appearing after a Thursday. A pair of young men who came in together and sat with Preacher and drank from glasses you did not pour, and whose faces you haven't seen since. There was a Welshman named Davies who talked to you twice. He was between ships. His last vessel had put in for repairs, and he was waiting for her to be seaworthy again. He was saving money carefully, he told you, spending as little as possible, waiting. He came in on a Thursday. He sat in the usual chair. He accepted a drink from Preacher's associate, a thin man with a moustache whose name you've never learned, and you watched from behind the bar as he drank it, and you watched his posture change over the following 20 minutes, the imperceptible loosening, the slight thickening of his movements, and you thought about saying something and you didn't. And the next morning Davies's chair was empty, and it stayed empty, and nobody mentioned him. You don't know where Davies is. You don't know what his ship's name was, the one waiting in the harbour for repairs. You don't know if he ever found his way back to it, or if he's currently on something else, somewhere on the Pacific, halfway to a port he never agreed to visit. You will never know. That's the thing that settles on you like the fog sometime in the third week. Not just the specific moral complexity of working in a place where this happens, but the particular finality of not knowing. Davies was here. Davies is not here. The space between those two facts is an ocean, literally and figuratively. You sweep the floor in the morning. You scatter fresh sawdust. Davies's chair is just a chair. The machine runs. On a Saturday afternoon, after the lunch rush and before the evening surge, a man sits at the bar who is different from the others. Not obviously different. Not well dressed. Not loud. He's about 50, with a grey beard, wearing the clothes of a working man, a seaman's jacket, canvas trousers, boots that have been resoled twice. He sits with the deliberate comfort of someone who has decided to be somewhere specific and is committing to it. He orders coffee. This is so unusual that you double-check you heard him correctly. Coffee, he says without irony. Black. Hot if you have it. You have it. The pot on the stove is from this morning, which means it's been sitting for 7 hours. Which means it tastes like it was brewed from the charred memories of actual coffee, but it's technically coffee and it's technically hot. He drinks it without complaint. His name is Edwin Morrison. He's a pilot, a harbour pilot, one of the men who guide ships in through the Golden Gate and through the bay to the wharves. The bar's outside, the bay's inside. You need somebody who knows the currents and the shoals and the particular way the fog sits over certain parts of the channel at certain times of year. He's been doing it for 18 years. You work for Big Cal? He asks on his second cup. About 3 weeks now, he nods, looks at his coffee. You know what goes on here. It's not a question. I'm becoming aware of the situation, you say. Morrison makes a sound that acknowledges this without endorsing it. Every establishment on this block does some version of it, he says, some worse than others. Big Cal's is, he considers, mid-range. He doesn't do the rough stuff, just the compound and the contracts. Just, you say. Just, he agrees, with the flat acknowledgement of a man who has lived alongside something long enough to have calibrated his horror appropriately. He drinks his coffee. Why are you telling me this, you ask? Because you look like a young man who is trying to figure out what his situation is, he says. And I was that young man once, in a different establishment on this same street, and nobody told me anything, and I made decisions from incomplete information, and some of those decisions I've been carrying for a long time. A pause. What kind of decisions? He looks at you. His eyes are steady. Old and steady and carrying something. The kind where you think you're just watching, he says. The kind where you tell yourself that standing by isn't the same as participating. The kind you come to understand later are exactly the same thing. He finishes his coffee, puts a coin on the bar, enough for both cups, a little more. You're from Missouri, he says. It's not a question. He's read it in your face or your speech or some combination. You came here looking for something better than what you left. So did everyone on this street. So did I. He stands, buttons his jacket. The difference between the ones who find it and the ones who don't, he says, is usually not luck. It's usually just knowing when to leave. He walks out into the Pacific Street afternoon. You stand at the bar with his 2 empty coffee cups for a moment. Big Cal appears at your elbow. He watched the whole conversation from the far end of the bar. Old Eddie Morrison, he says, comes in every few months, drinks his coffee, gives some speech to whatever new boy I've got working the bar. He pauses. He's not wrong, by the way. You look at Big Cal. He's already moving away. Saturday night at the Anchor and Chain is a different species of experience from the rest of the week. The difference is not merely quantitative, not just more people, more noise, more of everything. It's qualitative. Saturday night has a specific texture that the other nights don't, and the texture is this: desperation with a surface layer of celebration. These are men who worked all week, dock workers, warehouse men, craftsmen, labourers, and who have their wages and have decided reasonably that wages are for spending, and who are now spending them in the fastest and most direct way available. By 8 in the evening, the Anchor and Chain is full. By 9 it's past full, in the way that San Francisco establishments of this type manage to exceed their apparent capacity. Men standing along the walls and in the doorway, and somehow 3 deep at the bar, the noise at a level where you're communicating mostly by gesture and expression, the heat generated by 100 bodies in an enclosed space warming the room to something almost comfortable despite the fog pressing in at the windows. You and Dutch work at full speed. There is no pause, no breath, no moment of standing still. Barrels up from the cellar and glasses cleaned and the bar wiped down, and the constant motion between kitchen and bar and back, and the reading of the room, always the reading of the room, watching for the hands that tell you something is building. The first fight of the night happens at 9:15, the second at 10:40, both handled by Dutch. Dutch's approach to handling fights is efficient in a way that dispenses with drama. He doesn't announce himself. He doesn't warn anyone. He simply arrives, with his hands already doing what needs doing, and the situation resolves. He has the particular expertise of a man who grew up in a place, 5 Points, New York, where this skill was not optional. You've asked him to teach you. He's been doing it slowly during the quiet afternoons, showing you the specific geometries. You don't use your fists if you can help it, he said, on one of these afternoons, demonstrating a grip on your arm that immobilized your shoulder completely without applying pressure that felt violent. Fist break things, start things, escalate things. You want to stop things. There's a difference. On Saturday night, watching Dutch work, you understand the distinction in practice. Watching him is like watching someone solve a mechanical problem, quickly, without sentiment, applying exactly the force necessary and no more. The 2 men who are about to destroy each other over something that started with a card game are outside on the street in 30 seconds, and Dutch is straightening his collar as he walks back, and the room has already closed over the space where the confrontation was. "You'll get there," Dutch says, passing you with an empty tray. "How long did it take?" "You?" "Cork," he says. "I was born knowing." By midnight, the energy in the room has shifted from celebration to something else. The early drinkers are on their way to being finished, some happily, some less so. The men who are still going are the ones for whom Saturday night isn't a release but a ritual. The ones who will still be here at 2, who will still be at some version of here at 4. The music from the melodeon next door, a piano, occasionally supplemented by what sounds like 2 fiddles and a man who believes enthusiasm compensates for accuracy, has been going since 7 and shows no signs of stopping. It leaks through the shared wall, a muffled but persistent presence, adding a layer to the already complex noise of the saloon. You're carrying a crate from the storeroom when you hear something different. From the back room, a sound that isn't the music and isn't the saloon crowd and isn't anything you've heard before. A heavy sound, followed by nothing. You stop. Dutch is at the other end of the bar. He doesn't look at you. You carry the crate to the counter. You put the bottles where they belong. You go back to the kitchen. You do not go near the back room, but you know what the sound was. You have enough information now to know what the sound was. Someone fell, not from a fall, from whatever was in their glass. The machine is running. It is Sunday, your third Sunday, and Big Cal has given you the morning off. You could go back to Telegraph Hill. You could go to the waterfront. You could do what Dutch does on Sundays, which is find a Catholic church and attend Mass with the concentrated guilt of a man who knows what his week looked like. Instead, you go to the harbour pilot's office on the Embarcadero on the slim chance that Edwin Morrison is working. He is. He's between assignments. A ship came through the gate at 7 this morning, and the next one isn't expected until early afternoon, and he's sitting outside on a bollard with a tin cup of coffee watching the bay. He looks unsurprised to see you. "Thought you might come around," he says. You sit on the next bollard. The bay is cold and grey this morning. Fog sitting on the water 2 miles out, waiting. "I need to know how to leave," you say. "From the Anchor and Chain? From San Francisco? From the whole—" You gesture imprecisely at the city behind you. Morrison drinks his coffee. "You have money?" he asks. $11. $11 gets you to Sacramento by ferry and train. Sacramento to wherever you came from is more. He looks at you. "How much more do you need?" $20 more. Maybe 25 to have something when I get there. He's quiet for a moment. "How long to save that?" he asks. 2 months. Maybe 6 weeks if I'm careful. Then you stay 6 weeks. You work. You save. You leave. He says it simply, as if it's simple. The only trick is to not do anything that makes you unable to leave. Like what? Like getting in debt to Big Cal. Like... He glances at you. Like knowing too much about the back room. Like saying something to someone that makes you a problem to be solved rather than a worker to be paid. The fog is moving over the water. The morning birds are working the shallows near the pier. There's a man named Davies, you say. He was drinking at the Anchor and Chain 3 weeks ago. He was waiting for his ship. I haven't seen him since. Morrison is quiet. Welsh? Yes. Dark hair, beard starting to come in. Yes. Morrison looks at the bay for a long time. Something moves across his face that you don't have a name for. His ship. The one he was waiting for. She sailed without him, he says. I know because I guided her out. Captain was furious. Spent 2 weeks in port waiting for his crew to be ready and lost 3 men in the last week. Said they'd been shanghaied. A pause. Said he knew exactly who was responsible and wasn't going to be able to prove anything. Where is Davies now? On the Pacific, Morrison says. On whatever ship he was sold to. 6 months probably, maybe longer. He finishes his coffee. He'll come back likely. Most of them do eventually, but he'll come back different. They always come back different. You sit with that for a moment. And there's nothing. No, Morrison says. There is nothing. The fog advances over the bay. 6 weeks, Morrison says. You save your money. You don't drink anything you didn't pour yourself. You don't make yourself useful to creature in any way. You do your job, and then you go. He stands, straightens his pilot's jacket. That's the best advice I can give you, he says. It's not heroic advice. I know that. No, you say, but it's what works. He looks at you. The city is full of people who came here with heroic intentions and ended up part of the machine they were trying to fix. Don't be one of them. He goes back inside. You sit on the bollard for a while longer. The bay, the fog. 40,000 square miles of ocean starting approximately 40 feet from where you're sitting. The weeks after that conversation are the longest weeks. Not because nothing happens. Things happen constantly. The Barbary Coast is not a place where nothing happens. It is, in fact, a place where far too many things happen, in too close proximity, at too high a volume. But something has shifted in how you inhabit the time. You know you're leaving. You know roughly when. You know what you need to save. That knowledge changes the texture of every day, not dramatically, not in any way you could explain if someone asked. But the anchor and chain is no longer a trap you're caught in. It's a place you're moving through. There's a difference, and the difference is almost entirely in your head, and it matters more than you would have expected. You get better at the work. That's the unexpected thing. Not because you care more. If anything, the clarity of your exit plan makes you care less about excelling. But because getting better at the work is what keeps you invisible, and invisible is what you need to be. Dutch notices. You've stopped looking surprised, he says one afternoon. When things happen, you used to flinch. I still flinch internally. That's fine, just don't do it where anyone can see. Dutch, you've come to understand, is good at his job in the same way a person who has been doing something extremely difficult for a long time becomes good at it. Not through natural gift, but through the persistent application of will. He doesn't like the anchor and chain. He doesn't like Pacific Street. He doesn't particularly like Big Cal. And the feeling you suspect is mutual in the sense that Big Cal respects Dutch's usefulness without caring about anything else. Dutch has $30 saved. Dutch has been here 2 years. Dutch's $30 is the slowest accumulation you've ever witnessed, and the reason for it, the reason saving is so hard, is the Barbary Coast specific economic genius, which is the same economic genius that crimps applied to sailors. The neighbourhood is designed to take money back. There are 100 ways to spend money on Pacific Street. Beer, gin, cards, women. The Melodeon's 10-cent entrance fee for the dancing. The coffee house on Kearney that charges 15 cents for what tastes like real coffee. The Sunday market on Broadway where you can buy hot food for a few cents that's better than anything in the Anchor and Chain's kitchen. And the moments when spending feels like survival. When you've been carrying barrels for 12 hours in the cold and there's a glass of something warming on the bar and the cost of it is exactly what you can afford right now and the savings can wait a week. Surely the savings can wait another week. You understand, in the middle of the 4th week, why Dutch has $30. You understand it from the inside, the specific gravitational pull of this neighbourhood on money. The way the ease of spending it now competes directly with the difficulty of imagining the future clearly enough to justify not spending it now. You keep your money. You don't go to the Melodeon. You don't play cards. You drink the cheap rye Big Cal provides as a work benefit and nothing else. Dutch watches you. How much have you got? He asks one evening. $22, you say. He does something complicated with his face. How long have you been here? 4 weeks tomorrow. He's quiet. $22 in 4 weeks, he says. He works the math out loud. $1 a week wages, plus... He looks at the ceiling. How? I don't spend anything. Nothing. Nothing I don't have to. Dutch is quiet for a long time. I went to the Melodeon last Friday, he says. I know, I saw you come back. And the card game at the Red Rooster the week before. I know. He picks up the rye, pours himself a cup, doesn't offer you one, which is fine because you decline. $30, he says. 2 years. He holds the cup without drinking it. I'm a fool. You're not a fool, you say. You're someone this place has been working on for 2 years. That's different. He looks at you. How old are you? He asks. 19. You're 19 and you're telling me things I should have figured out at 19. Your 19 was 5 points, you say. Mine was a farm in Missouri, different education. He almost smiles at that. Almost. The trouble, when it comes on a Wednesday. Not a preacher day, which makes it unexpected in a different way. It starts with a man named Curtis, who is a regular in the sense that he has been coming in 4 or 5 nights a week for 3 weeks, which on the Barbary Coast qualifies as establishing residency. He's a labourer, dock worker, you think, with the kind of body that the work builds. Broad through the back, thick through the hands, the stiffness in the hips and shoulders that comes from repetitive heavy lifting in cold weather. He's not particularly dangerous. Not a preacher client. He's too expensive looking for that, which is an odd way to put it, but true. The men preacher works with are specifically the ones who look like they have no one to notice they're gone. Curtis has the look of a man with a wife somewhere, probably, or at least with people who would ask where he went. But Curtis has been drinking hard for 3 days running, and when men drink hard for 3 days running, the thing that was manageable on day 1 has usually become something larger by day 3. The man Curtis gets into it with is a river pilot named Hackett, who is in the wrong place through no particular fault of his own, who sat in the wrong chair at the wrong time, which is the Barbary Coast version of original sin. The fight is loud, louder than the usual ones, more committed. Dutch handles Curtis, gets him turned, gets the arm up, starts moving him toward the door. Curtis, who is larger than average, who has been drinking for 3 days, who is operating on a logic several drinks beyond reason, Curtis decides that exiting is not acceptable. He swings. Dutch avoids it. Barely. The second swing catches Dutch in the shoulder, hard enough that Dutch goes sideways into the bar. You're already moving. This is the thing Dutch has been teaching you. Not to freeze, not to think, to move before the thinking starts, to trust the geometry, to apply exactly the force necessary. You get Curtis by the right arm from behind, the grip Dutch showed you, the specific angle, and you lean into the leverage, and Curtis is bigger than you, but the angle doesn't care about size. And the pain in the shoulder joint is immediate and persuasive, and Curtis makes a decision. The decision is to go outside. You take him outside. He ends up on the Pacific Street cobbles, sitting down, not hurt, just stopped. Hey, he says, looking up at you with the honest puzzlement of a man whose body has done something his brain didn't fully authorize. What just... You were fighting, you say. Was I? He thinks about this. Right. He sits on the cobbles for a moment. The night air is cold and the fog is in, and the gas lamp across the street is a yellow smear. My wife left, he says. I'm sorry. 6 months ago. Took the kids to her mother's in Oakland. He looks at his hands. I've been drinking since. I can see that. He laughs, a short, defeated laugh. Am I going to be allowed back in there? You think about Dutch's shoulder. Not tonight, you say. Fair enough. He gets up, not gracefully but eventually, and walks east along Pacific Street, disappearing into the fog. You go back inside. Dutch is rotating his arm experimentally, testing the shoulder. Good, he says. You okay? Not broken. Good work. He looks at you with something that is not quite respect, because Dutch doesn't do respect in any obvious way, but is the closest thing to it in his vocabulary. Morrison was right about you, he says. You know Morrison. Everybody knows Morrison. He rotates his arm again, winces. He came and talked to me too when I first started. Said I looked like a young man trying to figure out what his situation was. What did he tell you? Same thing he told you, probably. To leave. To leave. Dutch is quiet for a moment. I didn't. Obviously. Why not? He's quiet. Same reason most people don't, he says. You know what you're leaving. You don't know what you're going to. And the not knowing is scarier than the knowing, even when what you know is bad. He looks at the bar, the glass he set down when Curtis started. Your problem is the opposite, he says. You know what you're going to. You've got somewhere to go. Missouri. Missouri, which is, he considers, which is not this, and sometimes not this is enough. The last week is different from the first week in every way that matters. The first week you move through the anchor and chain like someone moving through water, everything offering resistance, everything requiring more effort than you expected. Your body and your senses overwhelmed by the noise and the smell and the specific density of the place. The last week, the place moves through you. You're here, but you're already partly gone. You see it all clearly, with the peculiar clarity of departure, the way things sharpen when you're about to lose them or leave them, or when the experience is about to end. The floor that you sweep every morning, the particular geography of grime on the mahogany bar, the warped mirror behind it, Jenkins at the end of the bar with his rye and his exact change, Dutch, who has started setting his own money aside more carefully. $32 now. 2 years of savings growing. Slowly. Because you showed him by example what strict frugality looks like when it's applied consistently, and he's embarrassed enough by the contrast to do something about it. Big Cal, who is, and this is the complicated thing, not a villain in any simple sense. He's a man who runs a business that involves, as one component, facilitating the involuntary impressment of sailors. He's also a man who runs a saloon, who employs people, who maintains a certain rough order on Pacific Street, who knows the name of every regular, and whose wife, you've learned, died 3 years ago in a cholera outbreak, and who keeps a photograph of her behind the bar that he occasionally looks at when he thinks no one is watching. Both of these things are true simultaneously. The Barbary Coast is full of men who are several things at once, and the thing you've learned is that this doesn't make them easier to categorize. It makes them harder. The last Thursday, preacher comes in. He glances at you across the room. The assessing look. You go to the cellar. By the time you come back up, the back room is closed and the evening is progressing normally. And whatever happened in the back room will never be something you know specifically. You sweep the floor. You stock the bar. You do the work. On your last morning, you wake up in the cot in the closet behind the kitchen, and the ceiling is 4 feet from your face, and Dutch is on the left side breathing steadily, and the sounds of Pacific Street are already beginning outside, and you lie there for exactly 1 minute taking inventory. $31 in your coat pocket sewed into the lining 3 days ago with a needle Dutch gave you. Enough for the ferry to Sacramento, the train east from there, and a few weeks of eating while you figure out the next thing. Your body is different from the body that arrived 5 weeks ago. Your hands are rougher, the knuckles permanently darkened in the creases like Dutch's, the palms calloused from the barrel handles and the mop handles and the crate corners. Your arms are heavier through the forearms. Your back has accepted the lifting work and stopped complaining the way it did in the first week. You smell like the place, like beer and sawdust and the particular coal smoke of San Francisco and something indefinably of the waterfront, of salt and rope and the bay. You can't smell it on yourself anymore. You've been marinated in it long enough that your nose has given up, but you know it's there. You get up without waking Dutch. You pull on your coat, your boots, your hat. You pick up your canvas bag, which has been packed for 2 days, which is exactly as full as it was when you arrived because you haven't acquired anything except the $31. You go through the kitchen, down to the cellar for no reason other than that you want to. You stand in the cellar with the lantern, looking at the barrels, looking at the locked cabinet in the corner. You don't open it. You come back up. Big Cal is behind the bar when you come through the kitchen door. He's doing the morning inventory. He doesn't look up. Your wages are on the bar, he says. There's an envelope. $1.50. Your last week. Plus the 50 cents that usually goes to room and board not deducted. Which is either generosity or acknowledgement, or just Big Cal being precise about the contractual terms of your departure. You pick it up. Thank you for the work, you say. He looks up at that. Studies you for a moment with those eyes that have been calculating transactions for 43 years. Morrison talks to everybody, he says. Has for 20 years. Tells them all the same thing. I know. I let him come in. I serve him coffee. I don't charge him. Big Cal looks back at his inventory. I figure it balances something out. You stand there for a moment. The man named Davies, you say. Big Cal is very still. The Welsh sailor, 3 weeks ago. He'll come back eventually. You pause. When he does, if he comes in here, give him his first drink free. Big Cal says nothing. I know you know who I mean, you say. Another pause. First drink, he says, finally. Sure. You pick up your bag. You walk to the front door. The anchor and chain sign is above you, the paint peeling, the anchor that looks like a dead man. You open the door. Pacific Street in the early morning. The fog is in. The gas lamps are lit. A cart is passing. The horse's breath making little clouds that dissipate into the grey. The smell of San Francisco. Low tide and coal smoke and something fermenting. You walk east, toward the ferry landing, toward Sacramento, toward the train that goes east. You don't look back, but you do go to the wharf first. One more time, you have 2 hours before the ferry leaves. You stand at the end of the pier and look at the bay. The abandoned ships are still there, still sitting in the harbour with their tilted masts, their hulls half sunk, their wood slowly becoming part of the bay floor, their ghost crews long dispersed, some to the goldfields, some to other ships, some to the city that grew up around them, the city that grew up around everything, around the ships and the gold and the crimps and the chaos of 30,000 people arriving at once from everywhere in the world and deciding for various reasons to stay. Somewhere out there on the Pacific, Davies is on a ship, working a voyage he didn't choose, toward a port he didn't pick, for wages that will barely cover what he supposedly owes. He'll come back, Morrison said. Most of them do. The bay in the morning light, the fog sitting on the water 2 miles out, waiting, patient. The Golden Gate in the distance, the narrow opening where the ocean and the bay negotiate their terms. Ships are already moving on the water. The harbour pilot's boat, Morrison's boat or one like it, is heading out toward the gate to meet an incoming vessel. The small boat moving fast across the water, The pilot standing at the bow, already reading the currents, already knowing where the safe water is and where it isn't, knowing where the safe water is and where it isn't. You watch the boat until it's too small to see. Then you turn and walk toward the ferry landing. The ferry from San Francisco to Sacramento leaves at 7:30. 50 cents. A bench seat on the upper deck. The city falling away behind you as the ferry moves through the bay. You watch the skyline. Telegraph Hill with its wooden tower. The jumbled rooftops of the Barbary Coast. The dome of the new city hall still under construction, scaffolding around the drum. The masts of the ships in the harbour. The fog is still sitting on the hills. The morning light is coming through it at an angle that makes the city look, for a moment, just a moment, beautiful. The way things you're leaving often look beautiful in the specific light of departure. The ferry passes the abandoned ships, close enough to see their details, the barnacled hulls, the rotted railings, the masts at their various angles. The names are still visible on some of them, painted or carved. Names that were given in other ports, other years, by men who expected them to travel the world. They travelled here, and here they stopped. The ferry passes them and continues east, toward Sacramento, toward the river, toward the land. San Francisco falls away behind you. Months from now, in Missouri, you will try to explain the Barbary Coast to people who ask. They will have read the newspaper stories, the ones about the vice and the crime and the wickedness, the ones that make it sound like a place designed specifically to be horrible, as if it existed for its own sake, as if the people in it had chosen that as their aesthetic. You will try to explain that it wasn't like that it was a place where people ended up, where the end of the gold rush and the end of the railroad and the beginning of something new and not yet named deposited a population of men who had been promised things and not received them, who were between the thing they came for and the next thing they hadn't figured out yet, that it was a place that served a genuine function. The ships needed crews, the sailors needed somewhere to go between voyages, the city needed the labour, and that the function was real even when the methods were brutal. That Dutch was a decent man doing indecent work for complicated reasons that started with necessity and became habit. That big Cal served coffee to the harbour pilot who told his workers to leave because it balanced something out. That Jenkins came in every day with exact change, drinking precisely what he could afford, the last remaining structure in a life that had lost most of its other structures. That somewhere on the Pacific there were men, Davies and the Scandinavian sailor, and the man who could have been from anywhere, working voyages they didn't choose, on ships they didn't pick, getting closer every day to the port where the voyage would end and they could come home. Most of them do come back, Morrison said. Most of them. You will not be able to explain the fog, the specific way the fog changes a place, the way it makes distances impossible to judge and sounds impossible to locate, and the person behind you could be 10 yards away or right at your shoulder, and you would not know until you turned around. The fog makes everything conditional, makes every solid thing a guess. San Francisco in 1873 is a city of guesses, of conditional solidity, of things that look permanent from Telegraph Hill that are, from the inside, always on the verge of something else. You will carry the smell of it for longer than you expect. The yeast and the salt and the coal smoke. You will smell sawdust for years and think of the anchor and chain. You will smell cheap rye and think of Dutch in the cellar, talking about Cork and New York and the things he couldn't go back to. You'll keep the scar on your right palm from the barrel handle from the first morning in the cellar. It will be a thin line, barely visible, but you will know it's there. You'll keep $31 in your coat pocket until you get somewhere safe enough to put it somewhere better. You will keep Morrison's advice, not heroic advice, just what works. The Barbary Coast continued for decades after you left. It peaked in the 1870s and 1880s. This specific variety of chaos, this specific combination of legitimate commerce and criminal enterprise operating in the same rooms. The crimping, the shanghaiing, continued until the federal government passed the Shipping Commissioners Act in 1872 and then increasingly enforced it, and the sailors' unions grew strong enough to make it dangerous, and eventually the economics shifted. Steam replaced sail. Steamships needed different crews, different skills, and the old system of casual impressing became less viable. But it didn't end quickly or cleanly. In 1875, 2 years after you left, a man named Shanghai Kelly did exactly what I told you about earlier. 80 men, 3 ships, a party boat, all at once. The newspapers covered it. Nothing particular happened to Kelly. He kept operating. The Barbary Coast kept operating. There were reform crusades. There were always reform crusades, and there were investigations, and there were newspaper series, and there were concerned citizens who wrote letters to the mayor. And the Barbary Coast absorbed all of it the way it absorbed everything. It adapted slightly. It moved its worst operations to slightly less visible locations. It continued. The earthquake of 1906 changed San Francisco more profoundly than any reform campaign. The fire that followed the earthquake burned the Barbary Coast almost completely. When it was rebuilt differently. The specific ecology of the place, the specific combination of geography and population and economic conditions that made the Barbary Coast possible, was disrupted enough that it couldn't quite reconstitute itself the same way. The neighbourhood changed, became something else. Pacific Street is still there. The street still exists. There are buildings on it now that postdate the earthquake, newer buildings, businesses whose purposes are entirely ordinary. You could walk down Pacific Street today and not know. But the bay is still there. The Golden Gate is still there. The fog still rolls in every afternoon in summer, over the hills, down into the city, dropping temperatures 15 degrees in an hour. The abandoned ships are mostly gone now. The bay has been reshaped over a century. The landfill has expanded. The old anchorages are under streets and parking lots, but the water is still there. The place where the bay opens into the strait, and the strait opens into the ocean, and the ocean goes, essentially, forever. Ships still move through the gate. They always have. They always will. Some of them carrying cargo, some of them carrying crew. Most of the crew these days, exactly where they want to be. It is late. You have been travelling all day in this story, and now it is night. Yours wherever you actually are, your room, your bed, the dark quiet of wherever you go to sleep. And the city of 1873 San Francisco is getting more distant, the way things do as sleep reaches up for them. The fog is in, or the darkness is in, which is its own kind of fog. Let the sounds go first. The melodeon's piano, already fading. The carts on Pacific Street. The bay water against the pilings. The far-off cry of a gull on the water, hunting. The smells go second. Yeast and sawdust and brine and coal smoke and the deep earth smell of the cellar. Let them go. Let them settle into the place where the things you carry wait until morning. Dutch is on his left side of the cot in the closet behind the kitchen, $32 in his boot. He'll save more. The habit has taken hold now. By this time next year he'll have enough to do the next thing. He'll do the next thing. Jenkins is at the end of the bar with his exact change. Always the exact amount, not one drink more. The mathematics of a man who has found the smallest possible container for what remains of hope and is protecting it carefully. Morrison is on the pilot's boat, somewhere in the bay, reading the water, knowing where the safe channel is, knowing where the shoals are. The specific skill of a man who has spent his life navigating between what is dangerous and what is safe, with the bay fog all around him and the lights of the shore somewhere to the east. Davies is on the Pacific, getting closer every day to wherever the voyage ends. Most of them come back. Most of them. The bay is 40,000 square miles of possibility. Ships moving in every direction. Men going toward things and coming back from things and occasionally being taken toward things they didn't choose. The bay doesn't care in the way that oceans don't care, but the people on it do. They always do. The caring is the thing that persists. The human refusal to stop caring about the destination, about the choice, about the difference between going somewhere willingly and being taken there, that persists across every technology, every era, every change in the method of propulsion. The fog is in, your body is heavy, pleasantly heavy, the weight of a full day, your hands are still, the roughness of them, the calluses, the thin scar on the right palm, these are in their own dark quiet. The sounds of wherever you are now, not Pacific Street, not the bay, just your sounds, your room, are the sounds of your life, which is not 1873 and not a Barbary Coast saloon, and for that, quietly, specifically, you are grateful. Let the gratitude settle. Let the weight settle. Let the thoughts slow down, the way thoughts slow down when sleep is close, the way a sentence runs out before it, the bay, the fog, the ships coming in through the gate. Always more ships coming in. Let sleep come the way the fog comes, from the west, rolling in, covering the details first, then the outlines, then the whole. You have been here. You have worked. You have learned something about the specific machinery of a place, and what it costs to be part of it, and what it costs to leave. You have $31 in your coat pocket sewed into the lining. That's enough to start. That is always enough to start. Warm enough, safe enough, still enough. Let the city go. Let it all go. You've earned this. Take it. Good night.